Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Oh, you clicked start broadcast.
I certainly have. Can I unclick that somehow?
Yes.
Right.
Hello. Welcome to the May. He said immediately needing the cough. Welcome to the May Glasgow section PWI. Domestic arrangements tonight are whatever you have in your own home or wherever you happen to be listening to this webinar. Hopefully your domestic arrangements are known to you and you'll know exactly where to go to the toilet and you'll be able to charge up your glass whenever the need arises. We've got quite a good attendance at the moment. We've got 29 and folks are still joining online. The online webinar is the only way to take up this presentation tonight. It's in lieu of a visit to, as a section visit, the Bowness and Kinneil Railway. But the situation being as it is, the next best thing was to have a virtual Bowness and Kinneil Railway evening, which Jim and Andrew have kindly prepared for us tonight. So that'll be worth sitting here and listening and getting an absolute drink to. So, correspondence and business arising. Jim, have we any correspondence?
We have no correspondence as such, Tom. The only two things I would like to advise our audience of is firstly, the intersection quiz scheduled for the 13th of June in Carlisle has been postponed, currently until further notice, but I would very much hope that we can run this again in September or October, and that of course Glasgow will retain the Hadrian Shield. And the second thing is that the PWI's Glasgow seminar on electrification has been rescheduled a second time. The new date is now the 27th of April of next year, with the subject and the speakers staying the same.
That's great because it'll give the speakers a chance to really polish up those presentations and have them absolutely slick. No time pressure there then.
Indeed.
Do we have any apologies by any chance? I wasn't sure if people would give their apologies for this or not.
No, we have no apologies, Tom.
Okay, so our notes of the previous meeting, which was a webinar that we held in April, we don't have notes, we just have a recording which was available, and Jim gathers notes and puts them in the journal. Which brings me on to tonight's presenters, I guess. So we've got two presenters tonight, joint presentation. We've got Jim Watson and Andrew Anderson, and a little bio of each of them for those that are not familiar with Jim or Andrew. Jim is a chartered civil engineer. He's a fellow of the Permanent Way Institution, and he's also a past vice president of Scotland. And he has been in my shoes. He was the Glasgow section chairman, and he's currently acting Glasgow section secretary. And if anybody's listening that would like to take that role permanently from Jim, I'm sure Jim would be delighted to hand the reins over to you. We're actually looking for younger members of our section to think about acting as office bearers, members of committee, secretary. There's not really a lot of hard work involved in it. You just have to have an eye on the ball, I think. It's about the best thing. Would you describe it as that, Jim?
Absolutely.
Not too difficult. Okay. As well as that, he's a PWI professional registration scrutineer, reviewer. So good man to know and keep good size off if you're looking for professional registration in the future. Jim's the man that you'll have to impress one day. He's been civil engineer for the Bowness and Kinneil Railway from the early 80s all the way up until the mid-2000s. He started his career with Bapty Sean Morton in 1972, Jim. Jesus, that's 47 years ago. He was in British Rail as an STO, PTO and management staff in the Regional Civil Engineers Office in Bridge Works Design and Works Maintenance when we had those grand titles. He's a track renewals engineer. He's been project manager with Jarvis Rail and with Babcock, and he's also been a director of the Scottish Railway Preservation Society, and he held that post from 1993 to 2004. He's currently Engineering Director of Watson Railway Engineering, and he's almost retired. In that post, he's been involved in projects like Airdrie Bathgate, or A2B, Gautrain, Swindon Kemble redoubling, freight train lengthening on the Southampton to Birmingham corridor, GNGE enhancements, and one called H2MEP, which I have no idea. Jim, enlighten me. H2MEP?
Hollowtown to Mid-Calder electrification project.
Of course. Why shouldn't I have
I should
not
just
known
have
that?
said shots.
Shots. Yeah, see, if you're not involved in the project, you don't know what leaky is, but it's the Larkfield to East Kilbride electrification. Leaky, the latest one. Anyway, Andrew Anderson, on the other hand, is co-presenter, is also a chartered civil engineer and a fellow of the Permanent Way Institution. He's been head of civil engineering on the Bowness and Kinneil Railway since 2017. Andrew graduated from Edinburgh University in 1983 and spent the next 4 years with, I'll get this wrong, Kensington, Little and Partners in Edinburgh, Invergordon and Saudi Arabia. He joined British Rail, ScotRail as it was called then, in 1987, and enjoyed various roles within British Rail, including PWME. He was in structures maintenance, he did some P-Way renewal stuff, and he was involved in the East Coast to Stairs electrification project, which was just the railway at the time. He's an examining engineer for First Engineering in the RT27 structures contract, and he was a senior P-Way engineer, again for First Engineering, in the IMC2 contracts. He was route asset manager, buildings and structures for Network Rail. Tonight's presentation, the Bowness and Kinneil Railway, as it says on the screen, 40 years in the making, is done in two parts. Jim's doing the first part, Andrew the second part, and if you can keep questions to the end, I'll be obliged. And on your little dashboard that you should have be able to see, you'll find a drop-down menu that will say questions. If you can take questions in there, I can take those questions at the end and run them past the various presenters. Okay. And with that, I'll hand you over to Jim. Jim, if you would like to take us away with your part one of the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. The Bowness and Kinneil Railway. For those who are not familiar with the railway, it's an 8.5 kilometre long operational standard gauge heritage railway in central Scotland. It is also the home of the Museum of Scottish Railways and was built and is operated by the Scottish Railway Preservation Society. Powers to build the railway were formally provided under the Bowness and Kinneil Light Railway Order of 1986, which covered the new build railway, and the Kinneil and Manuel Light Railway Order of 1988, which covered the transfer of powers from BR to the SRPS for the former Kinneil Colliery branch. Tonight, Andrew and I would like to provide an overview of the development and construction of the railway. Myself, I'll be looking at the years 1979 to 2007. But before we get into the actual construction of the railway itself, I'd like to have a look at the formation of the SRPS, its search for a permanent home, why it chose Bowness, and then look at some of the constraints to the evolution and the challenges and opportunities that the SRPS faced along the way. Of course, the opinions expressed tonight are those of the presenters, and in the case of the first presentation, the illustrations are from my collection and from SRPS archives. For those who are perhaps interested in reading a little more, there is a paper published in the PWI Journal, Part 2, 1989, on the construction of the first phase of the Bowness and Kinneil Railway. Anyway, moving on to the Scottish Railway Preservation Society. The Society was founded in 1961 with the aim to establish a museum of railways in Scotland. It was originally envisaged that the SRPS would actually be the Scottish branch of the UK-wide Railway Preservation Society, but that's not how it turned out. And I think to the eternal benefit of the society, it set off as an independent organisation on its own course. Unlike many of the other preservation schemes that were current in the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, the SRPS was not established to save a specific railway line, a specific route, or a locomotive. From small beginnings, the society has developed over the years, not only to build a railway, but to establish the Museum of Scottish Railways, which is a registered museum, and its collection is considered to be of national significance. So the first bold step that the society took was to establish a small objects museum in the recently closed Murrayfield station in Edinburgh in 1962. But as time went by, the society began to collect larger objects. So what were they to do with things like wagons, coaches, locomotives? This was the start of what we'll call the Falkirk Years. In 1964, the society leased from BR the former transshipment shed in Springfield Yard in Falkirk, where it could store its growing collection. This was planned as a short-term facility. However, it lasted until 1989. The facility, we'll call it that, consisted of a large shed 105 metres long by 13 metres wide, with 2 roads and a central timber platform. It had recently suffered fire damage and lacked water and electricity. It became soon affectionately known as the Midden, for good reason. In the early days, the facilities were very primitive. You had to break into BR's yard toilets to obtain water, and electricity was supplied by a Lister diesel generator set sitting inside a fish pan. Working members collected Green Shield stamps and embassy coupons to buy tools. However, during the years of Falkirk, in the 60s, 70s and 80s, the society restored several locomotives to mainline running and started the operation of mainline rail tours in 1970, initially using some of the vintage coaches together with carriages hired in from BR. And this operation developed to the society running a full rake of Mark I coaches on the main line. They were still running in 2019. However, who knows what 2020 holds? As time went on, the collection outgrew the available accommodation, and the accommodation was hardly suitable to properly display the society's collection to the public. Additionally, security became a problem, particularly the security of tenure, bearing in mind that the facilities were leased. The society always had an aim to run its own railway and to display its collection in an appropriate environment. However, it did have the wisdom to develop in a way that it would not financially put its collection at risk. The society looked at a number of railways to develop, including Doon to Callander. However, they were met with no support from the local authority. Rather, the local authority was keen to tear down the bridges and straighten out the roads. The natives were hostile, although 20 years later, they did say, "Would you like to come back?" But that was too late. And of course, the cost of the in situ infrastructure could not be met. The society looked seriously at Aviemore to Boat Garton as a permanent home. However, it was perceived to have too remote a location. and there were concerns over potential funding arrangements for the Highlands and Islands Development Board. And again, the issue of cost of in situ infrastructure. Unfortunately, the Abbey Mortibotav Garden project led to an acrimonious, at the time, split within the society, with a group going off to found what is now the Strathspey Railway. And I have to say, it's all's well that ends well. We now have two complementary operations, and since the 1990s, there has been a much more collaborative relationship. The society also looked at Longniddry to Haddington, where it did have local authority support. However, it was met with huge hostility from the residents of Haddington. The final scheme that the society considered was Alloa to Dollar, where it did have local authority support. However, a professional fundraiser was employed and that fundraising effort failed. So you can see there's a pattern emerging here, a common denominator, the cost of the purchase of in situ infrastructure. So the society sat back and made the bold decision to look at starting from scratch on a brownfield site. Something that I don't think at that time any other railway preservation organisation had seriously considered. Bo'ness in central Scotland was chosen as the site to develop because we had a huge positive support from the local authorities. And the proposal to build a railway at Bo'ness and a railway centre at Bo'ness was seen as integral to the regeneration of the town and the community. In particular, Central Regional Council were hugely supportive, both through their Director of Planning, Frank Bracewell, and their Vice Convener, who was also a Bo'ness councillor, Charlie Snedden. Both these gentlemen supported the society to the hilt and continued over the years to support the society. The society was also fortunate here to have the positive support from national agencies such as the Scottish Tourist Board and the Scottish Development Agency. So having a brownfield site to work on gave the society the ability to develop at a pace suited to the availability of funds. It also gave the ability to achieve a mainline connection at the then operational Kinneil colliery. And of course, Bo'ness is centrally located with a nearby population of around about 3.5 million people within an hour's drive. However, Bo'ness itself did give us a number of challenges. We had to plan a site constrained by other developments. We had issues of ground conditions. Given if you look at the two maps on this slide, you will see huge changes over the years to the land and the sea at Bo'ness. So much of the ground that we would be building on had been reclaimed from the Forth. So the soil conditions were poorly consolidated silts covered with a capping layer of colliery or ironworks slag. We had issues of timber ponds and, of course, coal mining. We also faced problems with a planned town centre relief road and an interceptor sewer. And last but by no means least, BP's Fortesfield oil pipeline, a 36-inch diameter steel pipeline carrying half the nation's wealth. Programming a development such as Bo'ness was a huge issue as well, particularly given that we'd be working predominantly with volunteer resources. And we didn't exactly have a big pool of professional, skilled, or for that matter, general labour that we could predictably call upon. The availability of good PUA material was also an issue. Basically, we were trying to build from other people's scrap, the quality of which was somewhat dubious because we were always trying to get things at no or low cost. This had an effect on the design of the layout at Bo'ness, basically having to design round about what you could get rather than getting what you wanted and designing round about that. Just after we started at Bo'ness, we were faced with a major blow. The National Coal Board ceased winding coal at Kinneil Colliery. Whilst Kinneil Colliery remained open, the coal was now being extracted under the Forth to the mine at Longannet, which meant that BR very quickly closed the branch line and understandably recovered the junction to the main Edinburgh-Glasgow main line, which was a facing connection situated on a curve. Funding has always been a challenge and remained a challenge throughout the development of the railway. So, when the development started off, the SRPS were in partnership with a number of national and local government organisations. Central Regional Council being the principal partner, along with Falkirk District Council, the Scottish Tourist Board and the Scottish Development Agency. We were later joined by the Manpower Services Commission, Sir Robert McAlpin and Sons. As time went on, the ERDF, Historic Scotland, BR, and even the Royal Engineers. Now, taking an overview of the development, again, for those who are not necessarily familiar with the site, the railway was developed in 4 phases. Phase 1A, which is shown on red on the map, was Bo'ness Station and the railway along the dockside, around about half a mile in extent, plus of course the siding development at Bo'ness. Work commenced on that in 1979, and we were able to run a limited train service in 1981. Phase 1B was the foreshore and linking to the mainline network at Kinneil, which was on reclaimed land and brownfield sites, roughly a mile, and work took place between 1981 and 1985 on that phase of the development. The next phase, which is shown in magenta on the plan, was Kinneil to Birkhill, and this was a refurbishment of the existing branch line, plus a little bit of relaying as well. 3 miles, 1985 through to 1989. The reason for choosing Birkhill as the temporary terminus was Central Regional Council had acquired a fire clay mine at Birkhill, which had recently closed, and planned to open that as an underground tourist experience. The third and final major phase was relaying the remainder of the branch line from Birkhill to Manuel and reinstating a mainline connection, roughly a mile and a half of track, and work took place between 1989 and this was eventually opened in 2010. Now, looking at the Bo'ness site itself, now when you look at that in an aerial view, by jings, there's a lot crammed into a very small space. If I was to start designing this again today, I'd do it differently. But at that time, we had a number of constraints. Firstly, there was a plan to build an interceptor sooner, which was built. And secondly, the town centre relief road, which was not built and which will never be built. But to say it did give rise to a somewhat compact site, a lot squeezed into a very small space. Looking at the Foreshore Railway itself, the major constraints there were the Fortisfield oil pipeline, which gave rise to the geometry of the railway on the foreshore. And at the time we planned it, the existence of Kinneil Colliery and bonded warehouses. neither of which are there today. Looking at various stages, Bo'ness Foreshore was built predominantly by volunteers with assistance from the Manpower Services Commission. The site clearance and preparation was undertaken by the Scottish Development Agency, basically a combination of derelict land, which included the town's rubbish tip, the Kinneil colliery pit bin, and a tidal inlet. And we'll come back to mentioning the tidal inlet later on, because that is something that did give us problems through the years, and hopefully it doesn't give Andrew a problem now. The method of construction on this section of the line was a mixture of panels and loose laying. And of course, we cannot forget the development of a siding complex at Bo'ness. Stage 2 was the existing branch line, again predominantly by volunteers with assistance from the MSC. The first 1.75 miles of existing track were purchased in situ. It was all we could afford at the time. And a new station was built at Birkhill, involving significant earthworks to service the Fireclay mine, which was being developed by Central Regional Council. Stage 3 was to complete the relaying of the branch, again predominantly by volunteers, but this time, interestingly, with assistance from ScotRail YTS. The new track in this portion of the branch is all 98-pound flat bottom, recovered from Kincarton Power Station. The section includes a viaduct over the River Avon, a 6-arch masonry viaduct, which was waterproof prior to track relaying, a new station at Manuel, and a new trailing mainline connection. Well, let's go back to 1979. The first weekend, May of 1979, as you can see from the photo on the slide, yeah, it was a brownfield site. There was not a lot there. Interestingly, the foundry you see in the background is still in operation and is now owned by Trackwork, and that's where they produce their railway castings. The other item of interest in the photograph, other than the very dated cars, is the fencing materials used. It's amazing what you can do with S&T channel rodding. So looking at stage 1A, the first thing that we went on to do was to lay the station loop and a siding. The materials were 109-pound flat bottom rail obtained in panels from Oakbank Bing, which had originally been recovered from the Waverley route. The loop and sidings were 85-pound billhead rail, which we obtained panel form from Grangemouth Dock, and also 60-pound MOD flat bottom rail with concrete pots and sleepers, the most dreadful track known to man. This was obtained loose from Palmont grain silo siding. Interestingly, some having been delivered via Haddington. The S&C was all 95-pound billhead, which we obtained loose from Oakbank Bing. Ballast was whinstone from Killycootree quarries. The plant at that time was rather interesting. Basic hand tools, a Ruston 88 horsepower shunter, and a wonderful Matisse tamper, which did do us well in the early days. The manpower for this work was all volunteers. By 1981, we had progressed far enough to start push-pull operations along the harbour to allow relocation of some operational stock from Falkirk and to create some interest locally and some revenue. In parallel with the work on the running line, we were laying sidings and expanding the sidings, providing storage buildings, etc. Not always done the easy way, often using primitive hand tools. I don't know if anybody else watching this webinar tonight will actually recognise the rail drill that we're using, the hand rail drill. It was pretty sore operating that. I now wonder, did we have the most appropriate lifting plan? Well, back in those days, we weren't worried about things like lifting plans and crane controllers and all these good things that we have now. Were we using the most appropriate materials? Probably not, but that was all we could get our hands on. Moving on to the foreshore. Initially, the track to Kinneil was relayed using oak bank panels. We reached the rear of the bonded warehouses at Kinneil, and then we hit a problem, and that problem was the BP40's field pipeline. We had been told that there was a suitable existing raft crossing of the pipeline behind the bonded warehouses. However, there was, shall we say, some confusion between the various different parties involved at that time over its form and disposition. So design integration fell down. Whilst there was a raft there, railway geometry was unachievable over that raft. So we had to sit and think again. We had a major delay in our programme, and eventually a solution was brokered by Bill McAlpin, involving the construction of a new reinforced concrete raft crossing and a complete redesign of the railway route. So we ended up with a new design alignment, which included a 210-metre radius reverse curve, far from ideal, but it was the only way we were going to get across that pipeline. However, it did open the opportunity to have a station and rounding loop at Kinneil, which were constructed within the former pit bin. The pit bin was landscaped and significantly reshaped by the SDA, including a nature reserve island, and a tidal inlet was infilled. It was infilled but not consolidated. Of course, this did give us the ability to connect to the Kinneil branch. The track work in the foreshore, Mark II, was a mixture of oak bank panels and loose sleepers, F19s and SHC clips, with a 109-pound flat bottom rail to liquidary ballast. Again, this was a combination of volunteer and MSC labour. Now, if you look at the top right-hand photograph there, I'm sure you'll all be going, oh my goodness, that's a terrible piece of top that they've got on that new railway. Well, that was a tidal inlet. It was never properly consolidated, and it settled, and it settled, and it settled. So a lot of ballast and a lot of jacking and packing went in there. Moving into Kinneil itself, as I said, there was massive earthworks by the SDA, but that did give us a really good solid formation, which we could run a wheeled crane on quite happily. So the track through Kinneil was a mixture of 95-pound bullhead panels recovered from the colliery itself and from West Craig Quarry, laid entirely by volunteers. This section of the railway was open to traffic in 1985 by Chris Green, who was at that time the general manager of ScotRail. Chris installed the golden chair screw. I hasten to add it wasn't gold. It was an ordinary chair screw, painted or spray painted with Woolworth's Best Gold paint, and for many years after could still be discerned. Moving on to the branch, as I'd said earlier on, we did purchase some of the track in situ from BR, and a further mile and a quarter from the scrap recovery track contractor. We also purchased the rails, check chairs and sleepers over the Avon Viaduct from BR, but those were lifted by the recovery contractor and set to the side. The track that we purchased from BR was a mixture of 109-pound flat bottom on the infamous BR1 chairs with elastic rail spikes, softwood sleepers, and some 95-pound bullhead in softwood. The 95-pound bullhead included some 1938 LNER rail. The refurbishment of the branch was undertaken jointly by volunteers and workers from the MSC. The work included spot resleepering, drainage improvements, vegetation clearance and fencing repairs. Unfortunately, during this time, we suffered theft of track. Rails and base plates from the quarter-mile purchased in situ from the recovery contractor were stolen, along with the check chairs and sleepers from the Avon Viaduct. The theft had been going on for a number of days before one of the few neighbouring residents realised that something was amiss and called the police. They tracked down the pickup truck, but the evidence, quote, was too circumstantial. With inheriting or with purchasing the branch, we didn't only purchase the track, we inherited a number of structures. Again, a change here because previously we hadn't any structures to maintain or refurbish. We had a number in this section, of course, including the A904 underbridge at Croyettes, which was a skew arch masonry bridge with a history of bridge strikes. We had a wee underbridge at Nether Kinneil, the high bridge at Inveravon, an overbridge at Birkhill, together with a number of culverts and retaining walls. Slightly worryingly, this section of railway had historic earthwork stability issues. It climbs parallel to an escarpment base, and in the early 70s there had been a major landslip. Since that time, since we've taken over, there have been a number of minor slips. I think currently things are fairly stable. The A904 Croyettes Bridge, we were very, very fortunate in that Central Regional Council were quite happy to promote a road realignment scheme involving the construction of a new overbridge, which they designed and was constructed by George Leslie. As part of the deal, Central Region also took over maintenance of the High Bridge. So all the public road overbridges on the railway are now owned and maintained by the various roads authorities. Unfortunately, to say, at Croyettes, the road realignment didn't come quick enough, and we did have a serious bridge bash, which resulted in the road being shut for a number of days, and the railway having to live with a fairly severe temporary speed restriction for a lengthy period of time. When the road was realigned, we were able to undertake some remediation to the old underbridge by fitting an Armco liner and enhancing an existing concrete saddle. Finally, the site for the station at Birkhill was chosen alongside the Fireclay mine, which, as I say, was opened as a tourist attraction by Central Regional Council, an absolutely wonderful walk-in underground experience. Sadly, through local government funding cuts, it's no longer open to the public and probably will not open again. To create a station at Birkhill required significant earthworks, firstly to widen the formation and secondly to reduce the track gradient. This was done in 2 stages, not by plan. That's the way it turned out. Stage 1 of the earthworks was undertaken by a detachment from the Royal Engineers, whose normal task is to fill in bomb craters and aircraft runways. They bit off a little more than they could chew and didn't quite finish all the work, resulting in us having to have a stage 2 and bring in a contractor. The platform and the track work were undertaken by the MSC using panels from Kincavan Power Station, and those were laid with a crawler crane. Before moving off Birkhill, it's worth mentioning the station building. When the station was originally planned, we didn't really have anything in mind for a station building, but you have to have one. It's a terminus, isn't it? We were fortunate at the time that our friends in ScotRail had a little problem. The station building at Monifield, which was listed, had suffered minor fire damage and was a liability and an embarrassment to ScotRail. Round about that time, preparations were being made for the Glasgow Garden Festival, and it was agreed between ScotRail, Central Regional Council and the Society that Central Regional Council's exhibit at the Garden Festival would be based round about the railway. Railway was going to be the theme. So Central Region paid for the dismantling of Moneyfield Station building, its refurbishment and reconstruction in a simplified form at the Glasgow Garden Festival, and then its subsequent dismantling for a second time, and transportation and re-erection at Birkhill. The branching station were reopened or opened in 1989. Looking at stage 3, onwards to Manuel, the relaying of the remainder of the branch was undertaken predominantly by volunteers, and as I said earlier on, assisted by BRYTS. The new track was 98-pound flat bottom rail, recovered in panel form from Kincardine Power Station. Prior to starting the relaying, we waterproofed and provided positive drainage on the deck of the Avon Viaduct. A new trailing mainline connection and a new station were provided at Manuel. The mainline connection was funded by the ERDF. Its design was undertaken by the Regional Civil Engineer and the Regional S&T Engineer in Glasgow and installed by ScotRail in November 1989. The connection involved a ground frame released by Polman Panel, and the earthworks were undertaken by the SRPS using a contractor. The establishment of this connection permitted the final movement of all the SRPS stock from Falkirk and from Perth, where the rail tour set had been stored. The relaying of the branch was undertaken in panel form over a week during the Christmas period in 1989, with fettling being undertaken over a very extended period, basically as a result of labour resource and finances. The relaying of the branch was quite an effort. Again, a lot of planning going into the logistics, involving a crawler crane at Bo'ness loading up flatbed wagons, which were then pushed up the hill and offloaded and laid in position by a second crawler crane. Having a mainline connection opened the doors to enable on-track machine access. So we were able to offer tamper and ballast cleaner training facilities to BR at that time, and they were certainly extensively used. The track recovered from Kincardine Power Station in some cases was quite good condition, but we had sections where the sleepers were in poorer condition. And we did take the decision in 2000 that because of the condition of sleepers over a quarter of a mile, that we would weld up the joints, thermite weld the joints, and we would re-sleeper in steel. This, in fact, was the first use of tie-in track sleepers with hook-in shoulders in Scotland. An interesting job, which we actually contracted out to ScotWeld. It was undertaken in the first week in May, and it was an absolute scorcher. So we were able to achieve a natural stress. I believe that this was the first installation of CWR on a heritage railway in the UK. Others may claim that, but I'm pretty certain on that fact. I mentioned earlier that the use of serviceable material often involves the use of other people's scrap. If you're not paying much for it, you get what you take, or you take what you get. To form the rounding loop on Manuel, given the topography and geometry of the site, I did argue for once that we actually go and buy a piece of S&C to suit the bill rather than utilise what we had lying around. And I was lucky to be able to purchase at a very reasonable price a serviceable DV13 from Trackwork down in Doncaster. And when you see the photograph of it, there's an awful lot of new material on that. That was a very, very good buy. And say Trackwork built it up down at the Doncaster site, and we inspected it, and then it was stripped, shipped and rebuilt at Manuel. I say 10 years on, in 2010, that section of line was reopened to traffic again, funding and resource driven programme. We've talked about track recoveries. We've recovered serviceable material from various sites over the years. Generally, material coming out by road, preferably in panel form, and a lot of these places, difficult access and ground conditions. I think it used to be that the crane companies and the lorry companies dreaded me phoning them saying, want a couple of 60-foot trailers at such and such a site this weekend. Eventually, they found excuses not to come along. The sites have included places like Oakbank, Bing and Contentibus Bing and Livingston, Deans Bing and Livingston, Kinneil Colliery, Grangemouth Docks, West Craig's Ballast Sidings, BP and Wishaw, Kincardine Power Station and the Bilston Glen branch. And Kincardine Power Station, I think, deserves special mention in that we recovered something round about 4 kilometres of plain line from that site, plus S&C units. We're talking over 250 lorry loads, and by jings, that was a lesson in logistics. Some of the obvious things, prepare the site beforehand, go in, strip the fish plates, mark up the lifting points. Very importantly, go in prior to transportation and stack up the panels to make loading and transportation more efficient. Build a haul road. We found out the hard way in previous jobs that articulated lorries, particularly when they're unloaded, do not take kindly to driving along unconsolidated ballast formations. We had to learn to bully lorry drivers. Now, lorry drivers love to drive convoy. And when you're trying to plan a job like this, you've got a crane at one end, you've got a crane at the other, and you're trying to maximise the utilisation of these cranes and have lorries getting loaded and departing, not loading, sitting waiting in the mate and departing. Organisation of police escorts for some of the S&C units, a bit fraught with difficulty. And communications were absolutely a nightmare. Bear in mind that this is in the days before mobile phones, and we were on a site where we didn't have a landline at either end. So communication was absolutely fraught with difficulties. I say, looking at it in hindsight, we do it totally differently now because communications are so much better. As time was on, our work scope started to change. Rather than construction, maintenance became the issue. So our guys were learning new skills. The railway was built from serviceable material, like I keep saying, other people's scrap. Softwood sleepers, 50 to 60 years old, well past their best before date. Wooden bullhead rail, that horrible MOD rail. So intervention has been needed. The choice has got to be one of three things. Do you do something to give it life extension? Do you patch repair? Or do you go for renewals? Much of that has been resource driven. Patch repairs, if you've got a squad of 2 guys changing sleepers, no, it's not sustainable. And we have a number of instances now undertaking renewals. Again, great if you get the right plant, the right people, wonderful. We've undertaken a number of steel sleeper relays, which I personally feel are very well suited to single line and volunteer manpower. We've actually done a couple of these as jointed on steel, which I know doesn't sit terribly nicely with Network Rail standards, but we're not necessarily working to Network Rail standards as they're not necessarily appropriate. On one of the renewals that we undertook now 15 years ago, only one joint has been an issue. And again, with hindsight, that was a joint with step plates between £98 and £109 flat bottom rail. We should have welded that up. However, it has proved a point. If you scarify the job well, grade the formation well, and tamp it well, it'll last, it'll hold up. Turning now to built infrastructure, it's obviously more than just P-way, a railway. There's buildings to go with it, there's facilities to go with it. At Bo'ness, we have a number of quite significant buildings, including the Grade A listed Haymarket train shed. Again, this was one of these things that was a problem for the BRB. They wanted to redevelop the site round about Haymarket Station, but the planners weren't happy about losing a Grade A listed building, the 1842 train shed. So, problem solved. Carefully dismantled it and re-erected it. In this instance, given the nature and fragility of the structure, the work was undertaken on our behalf by Sir Robert McAlpin and Sons, including some clever and hidden design to ensure that it complied with modern design standards. We recovered a station building from Wormit at Taybridge South. This was recovered by volunteers and re-erected by the MSC. We constructed a local shed at Bo'ness, which was a new build structure in traditional style, a steel frame building with brick cladding, including arched doorways. The cladding was constructed by the MSC. We recovered a footbridge from Murphley, recovered by volunteers and rebuilt by the MSC. An interesting one, this is 1982, we recovered the footbridge over 2 weekends. The first weekend was spent stripping out or burning out existing bolts on the structural connections and replacing them with service bolts. Then on the following Sunday, we come along and dismantled the structure. Something we'd probably not be allowed to do nowadays. Interestingly, a one-page method statement and a 1 hour site meeting with a representative from the area civil engineer in Perth was all the paperwork that was necessary. We also have the Burnt Island Urinal, which I understand to be the smallest listed building in Scotland, an absolute temple of convenience, manufactured by Walter McFarlane and Postle in Glasgow from the North British Railway Company. It was recovered one rather muggy summer Saturday, by volunteers and is currently awaiting reconstruction. Garden Queen South Junction signal box. Another success story in recovery of an existing building. Summer of 1982, recovered by volunteers, and that included stripping out all the internal works in the box, the frame, etc., stripping the slates off the roof, and bracing up the panels of the box, craning them out, putting them in the back of a lorry, taking them to Bo'ness, and re-erecting again by volunteers. The box is now commissioned and operational and has won a number of awards. Again, this was a piece of work that was done with minimal paperwork and, as far as I recall, no supervision. Moving on to industry partners, the railway is now regarded as very much part of Scotland's railway. We have provided trial, demonstration and training facilities to mutual benefit of the industry. And this really all kicked off ScotRail and the YTS, followed by machine operator training. Subsequent to that, in the days of the privatised railway, Jarvis were very, very much a big player. in utilising the railway for OTM operator training, alumina permit welder training. In fact, they set up a welding training school at Bowness Station for a period. And they're also quite good in providing us with materials. Davy Hanratty had a wonderful squirrel store at Miller Hill Yard, and they say he was quite generous. Hydrex, QTS and Track have all undertaken machine operator training. First Engineering, Tamper and AFM operator training. And Scott Weld have also undertaken permit welder training, and also undertook a interesting wee exercise in re-railing bullhead rail, because that was a skill that wasn't there, and there was a need at that time for that skill on the far north lines. Network Rail have also played their part. Welder training, MMA switch repair training, and a fairly recent concept, staff volunteer days. We've also now established good working relationships with both Napier and Edinburgh universities to provide a week's work experience for civil engineering students. In the wider field, Hunslet Barclays road tested a new electric loco for Tapai. Interestingly, they had to bring a Lomac with them and a generating set in the back to make it work, but nevertheless it was a road test facility for them. ScotRail and Virgin Trains have undertaken low adhesion driver training, which is a fairly scary experience where basically soapy liquid is applied to the railhead in a 1 in 93 falling gradient, and drivers are instructed to trundle along and apply the brakes and experience what happens when they don't stop. Viva Rail have recently demonstrated a battery-powered Class 230, and Artemis Rail are currently developing and trialling a hydrostatic-powered DVT on the site at Bowness. Turning to our volunteers come from a variety of backgrounds. The photograph is a bit dated. It's my Peeway squad back in 1984, which included 2 professional civil engineers, a professional electrical engineer, an apprentice electrician, a fishmonger, a turner, a accounting technician, a retail worker and a painter. Interestingly, the fishmonger, from his experience at Bowness, took a change of career and became one of the best S&C renewal supervisors that ever worked for me. So there's opportunities there. Anyway, the end result, I'm sure you'll think is worth it. And I'll now hand control over to Andrew Anderson.
Over to you, Andrew. Thanks for that, Jim.
Thank you very much. Just get that opened. Okay, well, I've been involved with the Bowness and Kinneil Railway for about 3 years now, which is obviously rather shorter than Jim. So to put together this presentation, I've plagiarized quite a lot of photographs from various sources. So if you think you see one of your photographs on the screen, thank you very much. You probably are looking at it. So what does the railway do today? Well, the usage pattern is fairly established. We operate 120 days a year or thereabouts. The loadings are quite seasonal. Very busy in December for Santas. We have special weekends, including Thomas weekends, and we have a summer peak season and weekends for about 2/3 of the year. And there's about 1/3 of our visitors come from each of them. So 1/3 of the visitors in December, 1/3 of them the special weekends, and the remaining 1/3 spread through our other workings. The motive power on the branch that you can see in the photograph, those are austerity tank engines. They're designed in the Second World War for low maintenance and to last about 10 years. They've done rather more than that, but to be fair, they've also had rather more maintenance that was planned as well. These machines are about 50 tons apiece. They've got a short, rigid wheelbase, which makes them quite good for manoeuvring around curves. For those of people who are more familiar with diesel traction, if you think each one of these is about the same weight and the same wheel formation as half a Class 37, you're not far off the mark. Of course, because it's steam and it's got the internal cylinders fixed to the frames rigidly, it wriggles quite a bit more, and there are track forces there that you don't get off diesel traction. The coaches, the vast majority in use are British Rail Mark 1s. These were built in the mid-1950s. Fairly lightweight. The axles are under 10 tons apiece, and the vehicles are about 20 metres long, so they're not as long as Mark 3s, 4s, or most modern diesel multiple units. The line itself is a maximum of 20 miles an hour. There are bits over level crossings and tight curves that are rather less than that, and our cumulative tonnage per year for the routine services is about 250,000 tonnes. So that's not far off, say, the Kinneil line up north. Where that puts us in terms of track category is well within the Cat 6 envelope. We're towards the top end of speed for that, but we're well within the limit for tonnage. Go on to the next slide. So there are other things that we get involved with. Perhaps one of the most visible are rail tours. We do run heavier axles in the units than the routine branch trains. The locomotive in this slide is a Duchess. They're RA9 axles. But these are quite common on things such as the Flying Scotsman or the Union of South Africa, and they do run down the branch, albeit at 20 miles an hour. We do provide Class 37s onto the main network. Last heard of, I think these were providing peak commuter services in South Wales. We stable these and maintain them, and we stable other locomotives for freight and other operators. West Coast trains frequently have engines sitting down with us. As Jim said, we are involved with trials. We provided the line to trial the battery electric Class 230. We actually built up the power unit that Artemis, where Jim referred to, which is a conversion of a driving van trailer to test hydraulic accumulators. But the most common interface with most people from our line of work is with the Monday Squad, which is involved in civils maintenance and civils projects. And when I got involved 3 years ago, there was a perceived maintenance backlog. There'd been a change of staff, people had moved on. There was quite a bit of focus on projects, and some of the day-to-day maintenance had perhaps fallen a little bit behind. So 3 years ago, we sailed into trying to do something about it. Next slide. Excuse me, I seem to be blocked. There we go. So this is January or early 2017. We've got a perception that we need to do work on the track. Unsurprisingly, it focuses on joints. We know this because we have reports of bad riding from the crews. We have a lot of broken springs on the locomotives. The short wheelbase of the austerity tanks does mean they go around corners fairly easily, but it also means that they pitch and yaw quite significantly. So the crew do get thrown around by the track defects. We do not have a track trace of which we can pinpoint defects, which is a different position from mainline maintenance engineers. So we set off goodwill. We'd got Ego 4 trolleys, you can just about make out in the photograph. We've got about 8 guys there, which hasn't really changed. That tends to be the average turnout for the track maintenance each Monday. And off we set. We'd targeted to try and do something about this within about 3 months, which is the closed period between the Santas finishing at the end of December and a reopening at Easter. What became a 3-month program turned into something like 3 years, doing a lot more than stripping joints and packing them. A lot of the joints had bad sleepers at the end of their life, BR1 elastic spike base plates, which are not the most resilient of plates. And we set up a program where we stripped the joints, lubricated them. That hadn't been done for a number of years, packed them, changed timbers so we could keep gauge better, and changed base plates for pandroll plates, which we were able to salvage from elsewhere on the line. This is us a bit more recently. I think this was the beginning of 2019. We got into spot re-sleepering now away from the joints. We're trying to put in about 300 softwoods per annum. We reckon that we'll get through everything that's timber in 20 years if we do that. Anecdotally, the sleepers we are now stripping out are in better condition than the ones that were at the head of the queue 3 years ago, so we must be doing something right. We've moved away from using the Ego 4 trolleys. You can see in the background there's the works train. That is much better for working in poorer weather. There's staff shelter on it. It's got far more effective braking for steep gradients, and you can carry a miscellany of tools and materials on it that you couldn't manage with a trolley. As well as not having a track trace for the track geometry, we do not undertake any ultrasonic examinations. In mitigation for that, when we do joint oiling, we tend to do a full strip. You can see that in the insert. I think that's some of the Napier students a couple of years ago on that picture. I mentioned Cat 6 track. We looked back at the requirements had we done ultrasonic testing and reckoned that it would point us towards doing them about every 8 years in terms of the tonnage that we run. We would not be looking to open the frequency up for stripping joints to do that in any case, but it is suggesting that with some risk assessment, with no history of track buckling and with 20 miles an hour, we may be able to open up a frequency of joint oiling on the straight track and where we've got concrete sleepers to perhaps every 4 years. That's something we feel that we can get through regularly with the volunteer resources that we have. There has been a fair amount of extra survey work in the background to try and work out where we've got the straights and the curves. Behind the inset there, that's a survey of the radiuses on the branch. It tends to be made up of either track that's pretty straight or curves that are quite a lot tighter than 800 meters, which does mean there's not many grey areas as where you would want to open up the oiling frequency and where you would try and keep it as it should be at the moment at 2 years. Other things to mention here, I mentioned changing the timber sleepers. Part of the setup in the last 3 years has been try to establish regular suppliers. The timbers we change for are new. We get them locally from an outfit called Gilmore Aitken on the far side of Glasgow. We've got a routine supply of pandroll base plates from an internal renewal program. We have learned to use the Roble packers to great effect. Jim mentioned steel jointed track. We have successfully dealt with 1 or 2 joints there, and they are holding up. And as I've said at the bottom of this slide, we're now starting to risk assess sites, having gone through all the joints in the last 3 years to work out how we're going to do the second cycle and what maintenance we'll be tagging onto that cycle as we go through it. Not a very good photograph, I'm afraid, but this is one of our minor renewals. This is up towards High Bridge. It's on a curve, not the tightest, probably about 400 meter radius. Timbers here fairly tired, so we had to do quite a lot of pulling through to get the gauge to hold. The strategy here is to take the timber sleepers out, salvage the base plates and replace with F40s, which are more likely to hold the gauge, and of course they won't rot. Given that we have managed to get up to 60 years perhaps out of some of the timber sleepers before they finally fall apart, we would hope to get at least that out of the F40s. So that probably takes it beyond anybody who's listening's involvement in the line. The photograph here you see, you can just about make out a machine on the right hand side, a road rail vehicle. We do obviously use that for handling the concrete sleepers. This was taken on a particularly hot day a couple of years ago. I think the air temperature there was between 25 and 30, but the machine was available having been brought in on the back of project work. So the feeling was we had to use it. Project works that are ongoing, the Burke Hill project, the long-term project at Burke Hill, and it has been going on for a good number of years, is to provide a signal passing place on the line, which will allow us more flexibility for special events, perhaps not so much for the standard service trains, but we can do driver experiences, train hires and stock moves without waiting for the service the regular service to stop. This photograph here was taken at the back end of last year. A lot of preparation had gone on, and we have just got the bridge up there from West Calder, lattice footbridge, which will give us access to the second platform. The platform that you see there is incomplete on the left-hand side. That's just a riser wall cast in mass concrete. Before we did the wall, obviously we had the foundations to put in. Before we could put the foundations in, we had to install the 6-foot drain. It's the usual series of minor jobs that build up. The vast majority of the work, however, done by volunteers. Working backwards, this is the footbridge arriving on a train from Bo'ness. It had been taken for refurbishment to a local steelworks on the foreshore down at Bo'ness, and was taken by a large HIAB lorry for loading onto our wagons. We realised that putting a haul road into the second platform at Burke Hill would allow us to get the same HIAB down onto the platform. And by taking the train up the line with the bridge on it, we were able to get short lifting radii, which avoided us getting a full-term crane. This is earlier on in the process. We've got an RRV on hire for moving concrete. The RRV operator and the Jaeger operator there delivering the ready mix are the only full-time professionals on site. They came in with their contractor. The rest of the work has been done by volunteers, which includes the design of the shuttering, building the shuttering, and building it to a condition that was good enough to get 3 or 4 reuses out of it on the site. The concrete was placed by the RRV, as we said, vibrated into place by volunteers who'd learnt how to be acquired and learnt how to use a poker vibrator. The minority of staff here have got previous civils experience. Most of them have come from other works of life. Having cut our teeth on that rather large job, we got enthusiastic about other things that came across initially as being fairly minor, but bearing in mind that we don't have track recording, these things are actually quite important for doing fault reporting. Mileposts so that train crew know where they are and can report defects reliably. The photograph on the left-hand side is a broken milepost. We cut that back and recast a concrete post on it. There were a couple of mileposts that were completely missing, so we decided we'd have a go at making 50 replicas, and on the right-hand side is a mould for the 26¼ milepost head, which you can in fact see on the left-hand side of the left-hand photograph. Bridges, we got number plates onto the bridges for the first time, and it's comforting to hear train crew actually reporting bridges by number as opposed to being a bit vague where they are. Painted a fair amount of the steelwork on the bridges, and we also started doing masonry repairs. This is one of the field-to-fields, not far from the viaduct. So with a bit of training, we were able to deploy a tower scaffold that gave us access to all the places that we needed. The repairs here are 1950s style blue brick inserts, except for the one in the bottom left, which is cast concrete masonry repair. There was a bit of a story behind this, as you'll have noticed from the photographs that Jim showed you right back at the start. There's fairly extensive docks down at Bo'ness, and a contractor there had been working on spraying concrete repairs to the dock walls. And they realised at the end of the job, when they'd taken all their transport off hire, that they had about 5 tons of fos rock and nowhere to put it. So one of our sheds knocked on the door, would we like a donation of fos rock? We said yes. 1 pallet arrived, and the next question was, where do you want the other 4? So we weren't short of fos rock for a while, and we used it to good effect to do masonry repairs. The bigger bridges, the viaduct and the Bo'ness footbridge, which Jim talked about and which you saw photographs of being taken out the first time, that had deteriorated quite badly, so that was removed, taken off to a contractor on the foreshore. Initially, we thought what would happen is we would have to replace most of the lattice work. Actually, by the time we got it in, we discovered that we needed to replace all of the lattice work, all of the floor panels, and the bottom boom of the truss. So that's it being replaced at the end of the job. Not all the work is physical. There's some of it which involves survey work. One of the things that was prompted at the back end of 2018 on the main network, there were 2 fatalities with folk with their heads out of coach windows. The regulator became quite excited about that because we have stock out of which you can lean. We did a very quick and dirty survey to establish we didn't have something that was obviously close to the track, but that was followed up with formal surveys to gauge the structures, and I'm delighted to say we managed to show that we get a clear run with a W8 loading gauge, and we could just about manage W10. So for what we actually run, which is a cross between C1, W6A and an L2 gauge, it's adequate. C1 and W6A are fairly standard industry ones. The L2 is a vintage steam locomotive gauge. The biggest difference, as you can see from one of the inserts there, is it's got a slightly larger projection at the top to cope with the steam locomotive exhaust. And away from the physical work, there are some of the softer issues. I've mentioned the Monday squad a couple of times. And here we see them. This is a typical lunchtime pose. We do always seem to try and sit on that wagon for lunch, not sure why. Most of the folk here are of retirement age. There are a few that aren't. Shift work tends to mean that you can get people who clear shifts for Mondays to come along and help us, and there are 1 or 2 people who join us between jobs. It can be quite a CV boost, particularly for young folk. One of the recent success stories, we had a chap from one of the Glasgow universities, no practical experience. He got himself involved in the diesel shed for mechanical engineering and with us for the civils for about 3 months. And on the strength of it, he got a job back home with the Singapore metro system. based on what he was able to talk about having worked with us. There's quite a bit of talk now about mental health issue. There's a network of men's sheds which are starting to be advertised. I like to think we're able to make a contribution to both. Our particular shed is on wheels and sitting in the back there. And we do actually manage to get some recognition from this financially from the lottery, who are funding, admittedly not a civils-based project, but the steam shed, when it goes ahead, will be an enhanced steam facility in the yard at Bo'ness. I think we've mentioned our connection with universities. This is the group photograph, along with the lecturer on the front from Napier. This is a couple of years back, Mark. What can we offer for this? Well, we can offer day shift access, day shift possessions midweek, which are very difficult to get on the network. We offer an element of vertical integration. You can come and experience how you interface off the works train, vintage rolling stock. You'll certainly get vintage track experience with real track forms. Corporate volunteering, we've had a bit of that too. These chaps are from Scottish Water. We've had folk from Scottish Water, a number of different teams within Scottish Water, and Scottish Widows and Network Rail, all within the last couple of years. On their corporate volunteering days. This is the work day shift again, real track issues. I think it's Napier students again a couple of years ago, re-sleepering. And of course, in terms of the heritage rolling stock, we have heritage engineering to go with it. And this is one particular part of heritage engineering that we're looking to get our hands on. This photograph wasn't taken on our own line. It was taken off a pedestrian level crossing, I hasten to add, on the Leavenmouth branch. We have a need for check chairs down in one of the platforms at Bo'ness, where there's a curve tighter than 200 metres. We would be absolutely delighted to rehouse 50 or 60 of these chairs and give them a heritage setting for a few more decades, if that could be arranged. And with that comment on chairs, I shall pass you back to the chair, who will hopefully refer any questions that may have arisen in the last hour. Thank you, Tommy.
Thanks very much, Andrew and Jim. Let me just move it back to me. I'll share my screen and remind you that what the agenda is, but we'll take questions. I don't have very many written questions, but maybe as chair, I can go first. If you have any questions, if you can type them in the questions tab. I've got one from Gus McGregor who says Ian Gunn can probably locate those check chairs, so that's one worth noting, Andrew. Those check chairs. Your contact name is Ian Gunn.
Right.
My observations, first of all, from you, Jim. £60 MOD flat bottom rail. Wow, that's a really light rail section when you consider what we're running these days. But I would say that you mentioned of the F19s. I'm a big fan of an F19 sleeper. I really liked its tow load, and I think the F19s will be around when everybody else is gone. What a sleeper!
Indeed, Tom. I'm a great fan of them. Maybe not quite so happy about them on tight curves. I'm sure Andrew will say a few things about them, but on a straight, gentle curve, great sleepers.
Yeah. Well, you're right, Jim. They have given us a bit of grief on that 210-metre curve. But to be fair, and it's another comment I'd echo even with the elastic spikes, which get a really bad press. These components have done real good service in secondary lines or even on the slows on the likes of the East Coast. They were there into the mid-90s, having been laid in the early 60s, and slow was 90 miles an hour, and I don't like to think of how many million tons were run over them. So for 250,000 tons a year on a branch line at 20 miles an hour, if they're in the right place and if they're adequately maintained, I think there's an awful lot of life in them.
And I think the only issue from a practical point of view is undoing them is a two-man job. Somebody with a heel bar and somebody with a chisel bar is the best way to do it, and mind your shins.
Yes.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, I suppose the big disadvantage.
That's just what you get.
The big disadvantage is it's not a mechanisable fastening, really, when you compare it with a fast clip.
Exactly.
Yes, I would agree with that. I'd agree with that. And personally, for that reason, I prefer using the pandrels to the fast clips because I think they're more amenable to hand tools.
Yeah, indeed. Another observation for me on the training aspect, surely the Bowness and Kinneil must be the Scottish equivalent of the old Dalby training track. And I'm really interested in this because I can see an opportunity here or get my track designers and more involved with your railway to survey and provide you with, let's just say, regularisation of some of those tight radius curves.
Yeah. Yes, we would be very, very keen to host that. I think that is probably the big offer that we can make within the railway industry, and particularly for the training of subsequent track engineers.
Okay, question from Greg McMillan. In the spirit of restoration, is there a way of refurbishing the Matisa trolley? This would help identify track defects on the route and would be maybe classed as a preservation project in its own right. Perhaps maybe it's limited in its ability to pick up defects at slow speed, perhaps.
I think the Matisa tamper that we have on site, I'm not aware of that having a record facility.
Oh, sorry, he was under the impression it was a Matisa trolley rather than a Matisa tamper.
I think we're talking about Neptune, aren't we?
Ah, yeah.
The Scottish Neptune was sadly cut up when it was in first engineering hands round about the early 2000s. I don't know what's happened to the one that was at the NRM in York, but yes, a brilliant idea to provide a proper trace. Certainly in my time at Bowness, we've been out with amber trolleys, we've been out with an Abtis trolley. It gives you some record, but it's not the same as a dynamic trace.
Mm-hmm.
Another observation for me is you talked about building the railway a single line. And your railway is effectively a permanent way built as a temporary way would have been done in the past, where people would use the railway that was constructed somewhere else as a temporary way for their new project, and you're building that as your permanent way. You're taking other people's cast-offs. And I think that's been reflected throughout your presentation, Jim, that the issues involved with that, where you've got a really good serviceable product that you put in the ground, it will last another amount of years, but it takes a bit of looking after. Would you agree with that statement?
Oh, absolutely. It needs tender loving care. And one of the problems, I think, Andrew is quite lucky in that he's got a reasonable size and consistency of a team working with him on a Monday. But unfortunately, P-way maintenance isn't seen as the sexy part of railway preservation. And it's difficult to build a consistent team to give that tender loving care.
I think that's probably fair. There's a bit of a men's shed mindset to this, because if you can get people to turn out regularly, getting satisfaction out of something they can do physically, which will keep them fit, mixing with people who've got similar interests, and it just happens to be about maintaining your permanent way, that wins a watch. And that can work very well for all concerned. Bearing in mind, as I said, that most of the people who've turned out have there's a few of them have had railway experience, but it tends to be drawing offs for bridges at some stage in the past, rather than active P-way work.
Well, if you need a ganger, I'll throw my hat in the ring as ganger.
Yes.
Question from this time John Oates. Hello, John. His observation, he's really enjoyed the Insight into Preservation Railway, and he's appreciative that having resources is essential to this type of works and project endeavour. Given that the PWI has its annual track work challenge, which other preservation railways have benefited from, has the Bo'ness and Kinneil made a bid to the PWI to host such an event?
We have indeed, and it was to be this year. Whether that still happens with the result of COVID-19, goodness only knows. But I think John may even have been there when the president was up last year, but we made our pitch then, and we were hoping to get the week of activity this year.
And Mark Taylor from Napier has offered some inertial measurement GPS units to fix onto the rolling stock to help maybe provide you with some cheap dynamic measurements, ride quality, let's call it.
Yeah.
Are you interested in that kind of thing?
Can I take that up with Mark offline? I am, if we can get it to work practically, yes.
And this might be the news tomorrow. Quite often these little things that begin simply, yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So more observations from me. One of the things you said right at the start, Jim, was the important, you mentioned reasons why it was set up where it is. And one of the things you said was the importance of a mainline connection for the Kinneil colliery, which, as it had turned out, closed soon thereafter. But these days, wouldn't that just be a business case for someone to put forward? And are there other areas where a business case would succeed better than the Bo'ness and Kinneil?
I probably would succeed better than the Bo'ness and Kinneil, Tom, but of course the big issue of the big cost is signalling. That is always the big cost. Initially, when Bo'ness was chosen and the Kinneil colliery branch was still open, it was a one engine and steam, yard working type situation. So it was a fairly low cost. And even with ERDF funding, when we got the trailing connection with the ground frame, it wasn't that huge a cost. But to think about that nowadays, when we're into solid state signalling, IECCs, if you want to have a new connection, the cost and time involved in having the signalling designed and delivered, I think would kill it completely.
But I think what you've shown here in your railway, and Andrew touched this, is that there's absolutely no substitute for practical experience. Your case study, if you like, of your young volunteer who, having no practical experience of railway, and use it to his best advantage. There's not really any substitute for hands-on, first principles engineering.
Oh, I absolutely agree, Tom. And then that, to me, provides a young P-way engineer with an understanding of the materials and the dynamics of track.
And I don't think that can be understated too much, although your cruelty photograph that you did show, where you showed the hand drill, and even those that can't remember the hand drill can picture how tortuous that might be. But two men lifting a sleeper with timber dogs, that was just bizarre. That just would not fail the manual handling test these days. But again, volunteers, the effort involved in volunteering is immense, and I guess the payback for the volunteers must be there, otherwise they wouldn't keep turning up every Monday.
Oh, absolutely, Tom. I'm sure Andrew will comment on this as well. That whilst I've not had practical involvement now for well over a decade, I still can take people to Bowness and say, "I'm proud I helped build this." Yeah, I think it's a personal and professional achievement to have taken part in building such a facility.
Very difficult to explain to someone who's not actually done that, and the ability to, wherever you've been, stand back at the end of the day and in the grey light of dawn look and say, I built that, and then several years later travel over that piece of track and thinking, I built that. And that's the reward, and I think the benefit you get from the hands-on thing. One of the things you mentioned, Jim, on your BP's forted pipeline part of your presentation, well, I found very similar to what we find today. You mentioned three aspects: confusion between the parties about what was going on and where. Design integration wasn't quite happening, and at the end of the day, it was unachievable geometry. You were asking for what had to be said was, "I'm sorry, we can't achieve that," and that, I think maybe other people on the webinar will agree that those three aspects we quite often face in our modern life, that we have the same confusion, the same integration issues, and the same, I'm sorry, I can't achieve that design because of the constraints you placed on me.
Absolutely, Tom. Looking back on it now, and to say we're looking back to the early 1980s, nowadays we talk about things with lead designers, design coordinators. We didn't have these back then. I just wonder, would that have made a difference? I always remember going out to locate the pegs that somebody from another party had put in the ground at Kinneil to indicate where this raft was. There was snow on the ground, and went out, did a survey, picked them up and went, wow, that'll work. But when the snow melted, I don't know what it was that pegged out, but it certainly wasn't the raft.
Yeah, snow is more than a leveler in that kind of respect, Jim. I remember looking for steel sleepers on the cess at Breach one Sunday morning because the snow had covered up the sleeper packs. And talking about steel sleeper packs, it's interesting to see that you welcome steel sleepers with open arms, which is entirely opposite, I guess, to the current feeling from, of what I see in Network Rail, where they're the bad guys, and you even use them on jointed track, which in Network Rail's thinking just wouldn't be countenanced. Interested in the compaction of a steel sleeper and how you deal with it under maintenance.
Right. Well, certainly, Andrew will talk about maintenance, but under construction, we always put a tamper through it. I know 716, but we put a tamper through it, prepare the scanify well, steel sleeper down, and the beauty to me for a volunteer type organisation, the steel sleepers, is they're manhandleable. Plenty of stone and a good tamp.
A good workout and a good tamp is what you're saying, Jim. And 84 kilos a pop, I can understand the good workout part. I've lifted my share of them.
In terms of the maintenance, the maintenance of the joints is the only place we've really put in much attention in the last 3 years. We have found that by surcharging the sleeper, the ballast up to the rail level over the area that you want to pack, and then robeling it in with the joint up on the jacks, that works, and it seems to hold its top afterwards. Which was a surprise, because we hadn't done that before, and the Network Rail standard would suggest that if you're going to have jointed steel, you want about 4 timber sleepers in around the joint, presumably because they actually believe that those can be robled.
Yes, and what I think you're talking about, Andrew, here is it's all about technique. If you have an item that requires a specialist technique, then develop that technique. And on the mainline railway, I am an absolute fan of Tamper DTS multiple passes for steel sleepers on pristine brand new ballast rather than scarified mud. Interestingly, that you talked about, Andrew, you in your presentation changing BR1s for PANs to create some sort of resilience into your track form.
Yes.
And but also that your program of sleeper changing was a 20-year program. That's a wow.
Yes, it is, and it may be we'll need to accelerate that. We may need to bring in professional contractors to do renewals if we're finding that we can't stay on top of it with the maintenance effort we're putting in at the moment. But we're quietly confident at the moment that we're doing most of what's required in terms of the track. That said, I would like to see fewer BR1s going forward, and that's one of the reasons I'm bringing concretes in so that I can displace base plates elsewhere. And ultimately, for every concrete sleeper we put in, we're taking out 2 elastic spikes.
Good, but obviously your sustainability credentials will increase the more steel sleepers you use, because rather than 284 kilograms of mixed recycling at the end of the day, in your concrete sleeper, you've got an 84 kilogram recyclable steel back in the melting pot.
Yes, absolutely. Whether we would live to, well, none of us will live to see whether we can get 80 or 100 years out of a concrete sleeper, but I don't think that's actually impossible. Bearing in mind that the F-19s you talked about, there are places they've done 50 odd years in situ, and that's fast and heavy running.
Question from Andy Blakely on the webinar, and it's hypothetically, if money was no object, would you want a fully compliant modern track form if you could do that, or is there value in a museum of historic track components? Does the experience of a jointed track have a customer value? Does it appeal to the people that travel your railway?
That's a hard one to answer. If you'd asked me 10, 15 years ago, I'd have said, if you give me money, no object, I'll have long welded rail from one end to the other, thank you very much. And that certainly gives you an assurance that you're going to be able to survive with minimal maintenance for indefinitely. But actually maintaining this, the mental health, the camaraderie, the providing something that people can focus on and get together as a group, it's a different way of looking at track maintenance, but I do think there's a value to it. In terms of what we should be doing as a museum, well, maybe there's an argument that says we should be keeping some of these various track types going so that people can actually see them in use and understand what the issues with them are. That's perhaps not of interest to the general public, but it should probably be of some interest to future track engineers.
I absolutely agree that if we can explain our heritage, and we sometimes forget in this country that we've got a railway footprint that was generally designed for 50-mile-an-hour maximum speed steam locos, and we now want that same footprint to run 125-mile-an-hour diesel and electric services. And it's how we have gone from where we started to where we are today without significant land take. Not greenfield site, not HS2, not let's charge through the Chiltern Hills. It's we are where we are today because of our beginnings, and I think it's important to tell that story. And a living museum like the Bowness and Kinneil is an absolute, it's a necessity. I think we have to have that so that university students, interested parties can go there and look at the technology as was and how it was installed and maintained with effectively the sweat of labour and not very many machines.
Yes, I think there's something to be said for that. If you've got the labour and the skills to maintain it, I think there's a value in keeping it going, and we seem to be able to develop that. Thank goodness.
Okay, last observation from me on your part of the presentation, Andrew, was your footbridge at Burke Hill. I was really impressed in one of the photographs. It was lovely, black and white, well preserved, painted, all the rest of it. And I couldn't help but draw a parallel between that and Overbridge 13A, at Strathmungo, which had £650,000 or thereby spent on it in the last couple of years to make it look exactly the same.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm guessing your preservation of that footbridge was somewhat cheaper.
Yes, the one at Burke Hill came from West Calder and had been refurbished quite substantially about the year 2000, I think. So although it was maybe 15 years into its life cycle, it was reasonable underneath the paint, and a blast and repaint was generally all that was required. The one at Bo'ness, there was a substantial sum spent on that, but it was nowhere near what you've just said. We were lucky in that we were able to take the bridge away for a year and put it through a works, which was only 2 or 3 miles up the road, but it was off-site and it was professionally done. The work did grow arms and legs a bit, so had we known that to start with, we could probably have turned it around faster than a year, but it was a substantial undertaking. And at some stage, I'll have another conversation with Jim, because it was quite interesting to watch it come out of its original situation, and that was taken out one side of the bridge at a time, which certainly wasn't the case for the one that went to Burke Hill, where it was a single lift of the main span, as opposed to stripping it into individual components.
Yes, we can have that conversation, Andrew. But what is actually interesting talking about the Bo'ness Bridge, it's when in 1982 we dismantled that at Murphley. It had spent its entire life in a rural inland environment. But after 36 years at Bo'ness, I was just sitting there working out how long was it at Bo'ness, 36 years, that it had been in what I would describe as an industrial marine environment. The deterioration over that period, significant.
Yes. Yeah, well, very much so. I mean, you would expect probably to design a paint scheme that would get you 20 years. 36 isn't far off double 20. And as you say, that's with, you're on the 4th, so it's salt water not far away.
5 minutes.
Okay, thanks for that. And I don't have any more questions been typed up on the questions part of the webinar. So I would just like to thank the pair of you on behalf of the section and those present, and say very well done. What an excellent presentation. I've been really enthralled. And I would just ask a final question. If there's anyone on the call who would like to become a member of the Monday Club or participate or assist in any way, who would they contact?
If they get in touch with myself. So they could either do that through you, Tommy, or well, that's probably the best way. If you're on tonight, if you want to go through Tom, and Tom, if you can pass me the details, and I'll take it from there. Okay,
will do, Andrew. Okay, thank you. And with no more questions, I'll just thank the audience for being patient participators. I hope you've enjoyed the experience tonight. And just quick, I mentioned that we're doing Aberdeen to Inverurie redoubling as a joint presentation between Glasgow and London sections, and that's like 2 ends of the country, so that's going to be good. Something we might have heard before, Robert McCafferty, Technical Head of Track for BAM Nuttall, and that's on the 3rd of June, and that's going to start at 4:30 prompt, so not the 17:30, but I'll have the meeting open at 16:15 for those that want to be there and seated. And our next presentation in the Glasgow section properly is Wednesday, 16th September, by which this will all be a faint memory. And we will be at the WSP offices in 110 Queen Street, for those of you who want to partake of a real beer for free. And we'll be talking about UAB surveying and modelling, and that'll be Gerald Brown and Kevin Bryce of Aerial Mapping Solutions. And with that, I thank you and bid you good night. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you all.